Harry's Lattice by Don Harrison, Chapter 1. Harry Donaldson's day wasn't going as he had hoped when he woke up that morning. He found himself sitting perched in his comfortable but slightly grubby office chair, in his comfortable but slightly grubby office, peering at a rather attractive young American lady standing opposite his desk. He hoped he looked suitably attentive as she introduced herself to him, hands clasped demurely in front of her, but his toes were curling in his shoes. Harry's office was what he termed a posh porter cabin, a temporary building containing a couple of dozen offices, assorted conference rooms and associated toilets and break rooms. It had taken up residence, claimed asylum status, and had already become somewhat permanent. Harry had wondered aloud in a pub once that he suspected the building was probably one of many that had crossed the English Channel surreptitiously under the cover of darkness and was intercepted by border control trying to slip on board a truck heading for the bright lights of London or Birmingham. After a few weeks in a detention centre, it had found itself disconsolately living in a chemicals plant in Billingham, where it languished to this day. Harry was prone to this sort of misanthropic musing, given the opportunity, and preferably several large malt whiskies. Not too much water, please. At the distillery, they serve the water in a pipette. The blank looks on the faces of whichever friends or family were the unwilling recipients were not recalled afterwards. Despite unpromising origins, the building was actually quite comfortable and boasted individual aircon that often worked. In Harry's case, 4 offices on his corridor shared a common roof unit though, so all had to be either cooling or heating. Mixed modes were not available. In a sort of bizarre ritual, the first inhabitant to arrive at work each morning got to pick the aircon mode for all 4. When the bastard Elwood made it in first, everyone froze all day, as he was a fresh air fiend. Harry rarely got to work first. But that day, the temperature in Harry's office was reasonably equable. Elwood was off jet-setting on business somewhere, hopefully somewhere sweatily tropical. Temperature aside, Harry was feeling that being beneath an unexpectedly earthbound asteroid would be a distinct improvement, and he watched lovely Anastasia's lips moving and acknowledged the sounds that resulted, whilst understanding precisely nothing that was said. All he could think about is why he should be trapped in this situation. Why him? Harry was not an outlier. In most ways he conformed to conventional norms and rarely found himself trend-setting. So how come he managed to get himself in pickles like this, which normal folk would surely never encounter in 10 lifetimes? In his state of discomfort, he didn't recognise the disconnect between normal folk and 10 lifetimes. Anastasia was about 19 years of age and was an intern who had recently started with Peasewood Garner Limited, Harry's employer. The purpose of this impromptu visit was to introduce herself to Harry and generally do the kind of things interns do, Harry surmised. She seemed genuinely nice, actually, in a sort of American college graduate way. Harry imagined her using faucets and sidewalks a lot, and telling the folks back home about the quaint tea-drinking habits of the third-world cousins across the ocean. Yes, and they still think The Walking Dead is a cool TV show. Despite the cultural divide, she seemed okay though. Harry would normally have relished spending a little time in her company, trying to avoid looking at her legs and awaiting an opportunity to trot out a semi-mythical story from his youth to make her admire him as a cool older dude. But not today. Today, Harry was suffering. Not really in a physical sense, but he knew that tonight he would lay in bed, close his eyes, and groan inwardly as he relived these moments. He would not, of course, make a sound, because then Lorraine would realise something was amiss, and the inevitable inquisition would begin. "What's that? Did you say something?" "Oh, no, just a little yawn, just getting comfy, that's all." "Would she buy that?" "You're such a liar." Putting down her book and taking off the reading specs, all sounds Harry had come to know and expect, and so the game would begin, cycling through the expected stages with military precision. "What's up with you? You've been quiet all evening, and now you come to bed and you're grunting like a baboon. Are you going to keep me awake all night again with animal noises?" The event progressed in stages. Stage 1 was entitled, "Welcome to the circus. Please come in and meet the performing animals." It included memorable performances such as, "It wasn't a baboon grunt, just an involuntary human exhalation as I settled down. Now stop pestering me and let me get to sleep. I'm tired after a long day." In stage 2, Harry would be quizzed about why his day had been so stressful that he felt the need to perform circus impressions. "So, sitting in your air-conditioned office pushing paper about has exhausted you, has it? Or maybe there's some other reason for your infirmity. Anything you need to tell me about, Mr. Testosterone?" Yep, Harry would think. Right on cue. Harry's thoughts were interrupted by silence. Anastasia had stopped talking and was simply looking at him in a classical quizzical pose, head cocked slightly to one side, like a sparrow waiting for a crumb at the park bench. It seemed that the well-rehearsed monologue had reached its natural end, and she was waiting his turn on the conversational dance floor. Harry performed the trick that he thought made him appear likeable and warm. Small smile, head tilt to approximately match hers, little shuffle in his chair. "So, how are you finding life here at PG then, Anastasia? Are we as you imagined?" And off she went again, trundling through the next chapter. Someone famous once said we were all born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should use them in that ratio. Harry approved the platitude, but suspected it had been invented by an introvert who was searching for an excuse to be considered friendly and warm, when in fact they were merely cool and uninterested in pointless information exchange. The whole conversation, however, was overshadowed by monstrosity. The virtual elephant in the room peered at them both as they performed the sociability ritual, and silently snorted its contempt as they pointedly ignored its existence. Effects tend to have related causes which conspire to confound our plans and create mischief. In this case, the ultimate cause lay several weeks in the past, when Harry received an email from the local GP surgery telling him that he'd reached an age of especial significance and magic, and thus was to be enrolled in a club of whose mere existence he had so far been unaware. Harry had turned 45. He was summoned to the Wellman Clinic. He was never particularly athletic or sporty, but always thought of himself as relatively fit. His ability to walk briskly up a single flight of stairs and still be able to speak at the summit, albeit using single-syllable words, was a source of pride. However, this was misplaced, as he would realise when he attended the rather slick and purposeful private hospital to be prodded, poked, drained, questioned, and generally challenged. The single flight of stairs feat masked several unpleasant conditions to which he was becoming prone, as his 20-year-old mind piloted his almost half-century-old body through an unforgiving life. The first nerves appeared when he was informed that his inquisitory physician was to be a Dr. Billy Bashdick. Harry had modestly ticked the "Male doctor, please" box, in the section of the pre-visit questionnaire relating to the invasive prostate examination. He had hoped that despite this, the doctor would be a thin, kind, serious older gentleman with slim fingers and not averse to lashings of Vaseline. Dr. Billy's name made him fear that this hope may be as displaced as his optimism over his health. On this at least he was proven correct. After being called in to answer questions posed by a nurse, having his hearing checked despite the roaring traffic noise from the road outside, having blood taken, and several other procedures presumably designed to wear down his spirit and make him amenable to further torture, he was left sitting in a little waiting room with a pot of tea and some sandwiches to await Dr. Billy. Finally, the door crashed open, and a vast brute of a man in a white coat filled the room, full of, "Hello, Mr. Donaldson. I hope you enjoy your sandwiches. Now is the time to show Dr. Billy how you are feelings." Dr. Billy was Polish, having come to the UK to train at medical school some years before. He was also, incidentally, an amateur lumberjack. Back home in Gliwice, he was the champion tree feller in the town and had a career all laid out just like his father and his grandfather. But he chose medicine instead, and now he loomed before Harry, brows furled across his massive forehead, as he listed the problematic results from the previous session. Blood pressure? Cholesterol? Oh dear. Body mass index? Well, there were several other results relating to blood chemistry that Harry didn't have a clue about, but they were uniformly a cause of Dr. Billy's concern. But all Harry could really think about was the circumference of Dr. Billy's fingers, soon to be inserted where nothing had been inserted before, in a sort of Star Trek split infinitive reference that circulated in Harry's mind like a Kylie song gone wrong. Afterwards, Harry determined that if he ever came back in an afterlife, he would first exert massive pressure on whichever deity was in charge to redesign the male ejaculatory apparatus in order to circumvent the need for the prostate gland entirely. He'd rather return as a woman. Or maybe not. Anyway, he supposed that getting a chirpy, "Feels very nice, you have a very beautiful prostate gland," from Dr. Billy at least meant there'd be no further insertions where ejections are the norm for at least a couple of years. Despite the beautiful prostate, it transpired that blood and urine results had revealed unmistakably that Harry had type 2 diabetes. When the shock and horror had died down a bit, the reality turned to be that he needed to take an oral medication to control the condition. Oh, not so bad then, thought Harry, as the initial panic subsided. He conveniently failed to recall the advice to lose weight and take exercise beyond the stair-climbing feat, and focused instead on gulping the required number of tablets at the prescribed intervals. Which is why there was an elephant in the room, standing between him and lovely young Anastasia, making Harry's toes curl and ruining the experience for him entirely. Lord knew what it was doing for her. She couldn't possibly have any idea of the ignominies of aging and how biochemical processes can turn stair-climbing he-men into Harry. Life as a diabetic was not a lot different, actually. There are so many of them in the population that apart from the ceaseless nagging, it's possible to forget the condition exists on a day-to-day basis. Pharmaceuticals, however, are great, and seemingly every week brought news articles on websites Harry read about how metformin was a kind of wonder drug that gave people superhuman anti-aging properties. A bit like aspirin on steroids, apart from the equal number of scientific papers proving it would kill you by next Thursday. Like all medicines, however, it has a known side effect. It can make some people fart. Harry was one of those people. Not just the volume of the expelled gases were increased by the drug, but also the chemical composition was changed. It abated somewhat in later weeks, but at the time Anastasia stood demurely clasping her hands in Harry's office, Harry had just grossly polluted the place with the foulest mercaptan odour known to science. Harry knew how bad the place must stink, and he knew that Anastasia must be experiencing the full horror and nausea associated with inhaling the remnants of the noxious contents of Harry's contaminated bowels. He musingly surmised that Anastasia might run screaming from the office, or at least make an excuse and leave early. Sorry, Harry, I've just remembered my Uncle Morris has died and I'm supposed to be at the funeral this morning. It was this stench of his decomposition that reminded me. Instead, they both kept up the charade and pretended that the appalling smell did not exist. No matter that Anastasia would internalise the memory of the experience as the embodiment of a charnel house, and Harry would die with embarrassment that night, prompting one of Lorraine's inquisitions. Neither could find a way to quit the situation. So, the elephant in the room just stood quietly in the corner and pulled imaginary leaves from imaginary trees with its imaginary trunk, and took an imaginary shit on Harry's carpet tiles. Harry's Lattice is the first volume in the Atharay sequence of novels, available at the Book Dragon at 6 West Row, Stockton-on-Tees, and on their website www.thebookdragon.co.uk.